Thank you for joining us. We're really excited to talk about this subject. It's a subject that we've been spending a lot of time on as a group, and a larger group than just what's represented here. But we feel like it's really important to talk about. And so we're going to do a quick round of introductions. I'm Jefferson. I'm the president and CEO of Austin and American Pets Alive, and one of the founding members of the Human Animal Support Services Project.
I'm Heather Owen. I'm the executive director of One Tail at a Time. We're in Chicago. We're a rescue group that supports our local animal control.
And I'm Cole Wakefield, executive director of Good Shepherd Humane Society in Eureka Springs, Arkansas, and we are a small rural shelter that is private but provides a lot of what would be traditionally government services.
And I'm Becky Best. I'm the director of the Gulf Coast Animal Welfare Alliance. We're a new collaborative effort that is bringing together the 200 organizations in Greater Houston to tackle our animal welfare issues.
So, very first thing we're going to do is start with a poll. So we're hoping we'll come back to the results later in the presentation, but if you'll fill this out real quick, it would help us to understand who is in the crowd and what you're feeling about fair share or the unbalanced, what we think of as unbalanced partnerships that are out there, one way or the other, no matter which side you're on, you may feel that way. And then also a question about how you think your community feels about more tax dollars going to support your community and to support your pets in your shelter. So I'll give you just a minute to fill that out.
I feel like I'm going to get plenty of neck exercise.
I know.
Okay, and if you're just arriving, if you'll use the QR code and fill out the poll, I'm going to make the screen go dark so we can actually have a conversation, and then we'll come back to a couple slides here and there. But let's see. Okay, so Heather, I want to start with you and ask you about the group that came together, the Haas Working Group role of the nonprofit, and just ask you what our original intent was and what we accomplished.
Yeah, so I think we came together to ask this question for a variety of reasons, but one of them is like there's always tension between nonprofits and municipal shelters, and part of it is about funding and like who gets funding for what and who's responsible for what. So we were like, okay, let's just sit down and figure out who should be responsible for what piece. And I think we thought it was going to be easy. And 2.5 years later, I got to tell you guys that this is the answer. We don't know. So if you were hoping for the answer, I'm so sorry, but we don't have it. But what we do know is that there are other industries that have answers, or at least clear boundaries or guidelines on what government, like what is their function, and then how we can support them. What we found is that there's differing opinions. There's different expectations, there's different budgets and all of this. So like we were like, we're rational people, we can just figure this out. And then we were listening and it became so nuanced and crazy that we realized that we weren't gonna be able to figure that out. And then that made so much sense. It's like, well, that's why there's the tension, because there's no expectation on what my job is as a rescue and what Chicago Animal Care and Control is supposed to do. So I go in there and I'm like, why didn't you guys do this? And they're like, because we want you to do it. So I think the goal is like to get there, but I think just identifying the problem is really a good first step. And then, if we clearly define what we want the government to do, what they should do, and what they can do with the resources they have, then it allows the nonprofits to fill in where they need to and be the actual support that we need for the purpose. And so I think like what we tried to do is like, how can we figure out how the government can be the backbone of what we're trying to do, and then the nonprofits can come and fill in from there.
And one thing that we've found, you hear a lot, and what we feel is like, well, the government in my area has never done this particular thing, and they never are going to do this particular thing. You can't get them to do this particular thing. But the reality is that relatively recently, governments have taken on responsibilities that they previously didn't have. An example of that would be recycling. Most of us in this room can probably remember when curbside recycling started in your town. And now it is widespread in many cities that have pickup, almost universal. and has been amazing public benefit. But that started because an industry came together and people came together along for sustainable culture, environmentalism, and said, this is what your public wants. They want curbside recycling. And now, after a few decades of really pushing for that change, it has happened, and most of us have access to that service. And when you first started pushing for that service, they said, there's no way you're ever going to get the government to do this. And now they are doing it. And the thing is that one reason they're doing it is it provides a tangible benefit to the government because it reduces the amount of waste going to landfills, which is cheaper for the government. But we can do that same sort of thing and find those same calculations with what we're doing. Just because the government's not doing it does not mean they won't or can't.
Yeah, and I really like that analogy because it's common sense that the government would be responsible for trash, but recycling is sort of a luxury item, sort of a touchy-feely, sort of a nice to have, and it has been incorporated in. And so other industries, the point of that is other industries have figured out how to create a more structured system. Okay, so Becky, if we think about like what Heather said, if nonprofits form around the government backbone of whatever is needed in a community, if the government is providing the backbone and then nonprofits are coming in and filling all the muscle around it, can you sort of recap what we found that governments really can't do?
Sure. So we talked a lot about how they have not been able to maybe step up in the ways that we would like. And in many instances, it's because their hands are really tied. Maybe they would like to, but when you think about, if there's a specific service that maybe we would like them to do, if it doesn't benefit broad enough across the community, then it's not really often a priority for them. And so there's some exceptions with like vulnerable populations that might impact a smaller group, but for the most part, you think about the services, they're really broad and sweeping to help the general community. Typically, they're not going to go into something that's going to compete with other businesses that are out there. They kind of stay in their lane for government services. And then we find a lot that they really can't lobby or advocate for themselves. We see this a lot during budget season. I know that our Houston budget is much smaller than many of the cities in our area. But it's really difficult for them to go in and lobby. And we don't have an animal welfare lobby the way that you would see police or fire or others that really go in there fighting to help them get the different benefits and pays and things that they need. So that definitely is a challenge for our local animal welfare organizations. And then along with those lines, because it is a government, there's a bit of an expectation that you don't skip rank. So if you are the head of your animal welfare organization, perhaps you report up to a different division. Well, you can't just go over your division leader and go sit down with the mayor and say, hey, I think I'd like some more money. My person above me doesn't agree, but I'm going to talk to you directly. You'll be out of a job quickly, right? So a lot of times people are not really able to go up and have those conversations at the level that they would like. So that's one of the other areas that we saw as being a real detriment to the ability for our industry to advance.
I think, as a rescuer and someone that kind of just jumped into this industry, I had no idea some of those things. And I remember being like, just ask for more money. And I was so mad. And then, when I figured it out, I was like, oh, okay, that makes a little bit more sense. I'm still very angry about it, but I'm angry at different people now. So, but I think it's, nice for the community to, know that stuff.
So then we started talking about what should government be responsible for? If we talked about what they can't do, and we've talked about some of the what other industries have done, what about in our industry? What should we be looking at? And the thread that sort of follows, if you look at publications that come out through the ICMA, I'm totally blanking on it, International City Managers Association, I think that's it. And some of the other big city and county agencies that advocate for cities and counties, nobody will say this is what government is responsible for, but there's a thread that's always followed. And it's generally taking care of the most vulnerable people in the community and making sure that there's a safety net for them. There is an expectation to provide sustainable programming. You know, one of the things that I learned when Austin Pets Alive was working in San Antonio is that bureaucracy is there for a reason, and it's because governments are set up to provide programs that don't change drastically on a dime. And so part of what governments are responsible for is sustainable programming and making sure that year after year after year, it's not dependent on a donor's whims. It's there for the community. And the other thing that came up over and over, which I think is really fascinating because we don't spend a lot of time focusing on this in our industry, is knowing what the community needs and providing it. Our industry, I don't see our policymakers asking what our community needs in terms of animal welfare and animal needs, or even what they value. They're just listening to the loudest voices or trying to get the loudest voices to leave the room. But really, it's the government's job to understand what their community needs and what they're struggling with and what is making them vulnerable. Okay, so moving on. Heather, this one is for you. So if that's the role of government, what's the role of the nonprofit?
Yeah, and we think, like, if you just think about the structure of a nonprofit, we're more nimble and we can fundraise more, so we get to do different things, which is exciting. So innovation was something we talked about, whereas a government facility might not be able to run a bunch of pilot projects or try new things or try to fundraise for new things, nonprofits can. So they can be taking care of things, and then we can try to figure out how to do it better and more efficiently. So that's what we should be doing, and then bring it to everyone else. And then, you know, there are things that we call them niche gaps. So like, for example, you know, the government shelters in Texas should probably have a parvo program, but in like Chicago, we don't see a ton of parvo, and so, or distemper. So like, it maybe doesn't make sense for them to build out a whole parvo ward, but then we can fill that gap. So something that, you know, is not going to be efficient for the government to do, but we can do to save those lives, I think is something that nonprofits can fill in for. And then the last thing is to be the support, so to advocate for them. So if they can't advocate for a bigger budget, we should be advocating for a bigger budget. So we should be gathering everyone that cares about animals and saying, hey, our city government is struggling because they don't have a budget. Instead of getting mad at them for failing, why don't we support them in getting a bigger budget? And sometimes, you know, advocating means advocating for a change in leadership or a change in things like that. So it's not always just supporting everything they're doing, but it does mean, you know, using our position as voters. A lot of times we're just people that live in the community that we can engage elected officials in a different way.
All right, so I'm going to plug us back in. Sorry, this is a little chaotic. Okay, so we know that we know that demand drives change. We've seen that in other industries. We know that nonprofits can have a very specific role in their community to demand change and drive that change. And interesting, through the work with the Human Animal Support Services Project, we've been doing surveying, and we have found that there is public support for the government to provide sustainable programming for public health and safety. That one's kind of a no-brainer. Reuniting lost pets, that's also a no-brainer. Humane and life-saving temporary shelter, that one's not always expected, but it turns out our communities do expect it. Supporting pet owners that are experiencing crisis, this we'll talk about more in a minute, and also rehoming. So when people can't keep their pet anymore and traditionally have dropped them off at the shelter, shelters in previous years, maybe even decades, didn't really owe those animals anything, right? Their owners surrendered, they don't need to wait for somebody to find them at the shelter, and they're potentially euthanized immediately or sent to a rescue group immediately, or if there's room, they're kept. And the interesting thing is that there's public support for those animals to be turned around and rehomed, which is great because I think all of us are headed in that direction and trying to make that a reality. Okay, I can't remember if this is a green slide. Okay, so this is, I'm going to take us back to the poll. Look at all my tabs.
Yeah, let's take a moment for all of Dr. Jefferson's
Lots
tabs.
of tabs. Lots of tabs.
You think your life is chaotic. Go.
Who has that many tabs? Okay, thank you. I'm using them all. All right, so these are your answers. This is interesting. So, and actually, I'm interested in the results. What do you guys think? Can you see it?
No.
77.8% said yes, that they think the community would be supportive of spending additional tax dollars and to help the community and pets in the shelter, and 22% said no.
I think like when we've asked these questions before, like we think of them as like bipartisan issues a lot. Like we think like some sides are gonna say no, people can't afford their pets, they shouldn't keep them. And other sides are gonna be like, no, we should help everyone. Everyone gets a little bit of everything. So there's a little bit of a division here, but I thought it would be a bigger division.
Well, and it does bring up the follow-up question is, if we feel that strongly that there's that much support for additional funding, why haven't we received additional funding?
Yeah.
Right?
But it also debunks the theory that I think a lot of people will say is if you can't afford a pet, you shouldn't have one. But you can see that a lot of the community feels otherwise, that if a pet is running in, or a parent,
This is just this group.
Right. So it's interesting that even among our own constituents, there is a little bit of differing opinion on whether or not people should be able to have pets. I've definitely seen times where there's an emergency situation that comes up with a pet and somebody feels like our nonprofit will take it, but we will require that they surrender it to us, because if they're not able to pay for it, then they're not fit. So it's interesting that in our results, and then what we're seeing in the community as well, that people do want to be supportive of pet owners and their pets.
Okay, let's go back over here. And okay, Cole.
Yeah. So this is first of all, y'all stole my big dramatic moment because I thought that poll was going to go differently, and then I was going to go, "You're wrong." But turns out you're right. And honestly, this is something I'm very, very excited about. It's some data that through Haas, they've done 9 of these community value surveys with pilot shelter communities, and they've asked some questions that we don't usually ask in our surveys. And this one is about what should the government fund? And we were surprised by when we saw this, because if you look at, and it's harder to see from here, emergency vet care. Should the government fund emergency vet care for privately owned animals? 59% of people answered affirmatively, and then 23% answered neutral. So that's 70% on the I don't care or I'm really in for it. And then look how many people are against it. And that is one of those things that I feel that I've always struggled with advocating for government money. Like, they don't want us to pay for private vet care. The public will never go with that. They don't want their tax money going to help Joe's dog. But the reality is when we ask the community, they do. They are cool with it. Same thing with food support, has amazing amounts of support. Providing preventative veterinary care, not just vaccines and wellness exams, not just the emergency vet care. People are in support of the government supporting pet families, pet parents, and their family members. And that is, to me, one of the most valuable things that we can look at. When we go to our mayors, when we go to our policymakers, we should be able to show them, listen, your community wants this. And then we as nonprofits need to figure out how can we convert this really compelling, positive feelings of the public for what we want to do. How do we convert that into information and to generating change with our public policymakers? The reality is 70% of households in the United States own pets, have pets. A significant majority of the public, at least what we have surveyed, this is just 9 communities across the country, various sizes and demographics. We need to do more of these surveys so that we can have better data. That does cost money, so funders in the room, let me know. We can do some more of these. But we're working hard on that, because if we can show this data that the public wants this to happen, we can do these programs and they can be as prevalent as curbside recycling. There is no reason they shouldn't. We should have one of the most powerful and influential voices in our city councils and in our state houses and in Washington, D.C. And the fact that we don't means that we're not doing something right. Look at the support that we have. So what we need to figure out, and particularly as nonprofit organizations, because government organizations are very limited on their ability to advocate, but we can take that on and we can help them get the resources we need, and we can deliver to the community the resources that they are asking us for.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's exactly that. But even as like a nonprofit, I thought we still have more like convincing to do. It's like we need to justify all of our community support programs, and it turns out we don't. We should just be rolling them out and fundraising for them and then pushing them everywhere because that's people want it. So we don't need to convince anyone, which is great.
They're there. The public is there.
Yeah.
I mean, and it's amazing. I think I'm looking forward to getting more of these surveys because, and the really cool thing is that these numbers pretty much correlate on every community. These numbers are very strong and very similar no matter what community that we are talking about. So chances are, and I can't say statistically with certainty, but your community feels very similar to these numbers right here.
There's one more slide for you to talk about.
Oh, wow, sorry. So, okay, so like the light green or blue or aqua and the dark aqua, that's like somewhat agree or fully agree. And then the gray is I don't care, and then it's sort of kind of disagree and really disagree. Yeah, no problem.
Okay.
So what these surveys have found is that 91% of all respondents believe that there was a need for additional funding for animal services. In your community, is there anything that 91% of people agree on, especially nowadays? Anything? So if we have the one thing that 90% of people agree needs to happen, why is it not happening? What are we missing? What are we not doing to make that happen? 67% of all respondents thought that the additional budget should come from means other than voluntary donations, which means they need more money, and we believe it is okay to use tax dollars to do so. In fact, we should be using tax dollars to do so. This is a public obligation to support our communities. 44% supported reallocating funds from other public services, sorry parks, and 36% supported a small tax increase for this purpose for supporting both. So 35% is not a majority, but that is a significant number of people who are okay with a tax increase. These are amazing numbers in our favor, and we have to figure out how we can leverage these for change for our communities. That is our responsibility, and we need to make it happen. And if we're not making it happen, we are not doing something right, and we've got to figure this out and what we need to change.
All right. Let me change.
I'm done yelling, sorry.
Okay, so I'm gonna pose some questions to all of you. And actually, I want to ask one more question of the group before we do that. How many people are experiencing uproar in their community about something related to animal services, euthanasia rates, humane care, not picking them up? A lot. I know mine is too. Okay, interesting. And I think one thing as nonprofits, we get on our high horse and say, well, yeah, they're failing. And hopefully the takeaway from this is that it's actually our problem, and all the angst that's going to governments needs to go to their higher ups, not to the people working in the shelter. Okay, questions for y'all. Everybody but Cole. What was your initial reaction to the survey results?
Shock. I mean, again, I thought it was a bipartisan issue. I thought it was going to be like 50-50, if that. And it's just like a relief also. Again, like I don't have to keep justifying the work we're doing. We can just start moving. Yeah.
I think for me, I wasn't shocked by it necessarily, but pleasantly surprised because in Houston, we have the Rice University. They have a Kinder Institute that does surveys. They survey about all different types of things about life in Houston. And one of the questions they had asked was, how many of you are negatively impacted by stray animals? And about 25% of people said that they had issues with animals, but 64% said that they still wanted to see more money going toward the government to help deal with those problems. So I think, again, in our community, that's not just the ones who are dealing with it day in and day out. That's a big a majority that says that this matters and we need to do better.
Cole, you can answer too.
I mean, it was amazing, and it's sort of similar to like when I started doing our food support program at Good Shepherd. or I provide some extra services to an individual, I always feel like I have to spend the first paragraph of the blog post explaining why I'm doing this so that nobody yells at me for doing it. But what this is, the liberating aspect is that obviously I don't need to. People understand. And sure, yeah, I mean, we have those little voices and we have our detractors in our communities, but this tells us more and more that those voices are a very, very small part. And so we need to figure out how we can elevate that major aqua on our side, how we can elevate those voices so that those little bitty, angry people aren't taking up so much of our oxygen, right?
Okay, next question. How do you advocate in your community for more government services and more funding?
I guess I can start on this one. I will say not well. So in Houston, our per capita spending is about $6 per person. The next closest to us is San Antonio, who spends $12, so they're getting double. Meanwhile, and I'm not exaggerating, we've had maulings, multiple with an S. We have had people who have unfortunately been hurt or injured or killed trying to avoid packs of dogs, yet we still don't get that funding. So I think for us, unfortunately, there is a particular level within government that has a lot of control, and that person does not seem to be advocating for dogs. We're spending about $30-some per capita on parks. What good is the park if there's packs of dogs and you can't even go to the park anyway? So for us, unfortunately, it's been a bit of a long game. We've had to wait for that particular person to be out of office, which is coming up this December. So, so I'm sure this person is a lovely person in general, but when it comes to dogs, not so much. So, so we're starting now by trying to make sure that we talk to the candidates and understand what their stance is, make sure that they understand the problem and the fact that, especially in vulnerable neighborhoods, there are people that can't go to the mailbox. Their kids can't play in the street because of fear of dogs, and that should not be happening. So we need to make sure that we're having one-on-one conversations, especially with us having so many different organizations, trying to have a unified message, do it in a unified and organized way so they're not getting 200 knocks on the door, some of them with a business case, some of them crying and screaming about the dead dog that's down the street, just trying to be professional and meet them where they are to really educate them.
And I think the long haul, that's important. The systemic change, especially with government, takes sustained effort over years. This isn't, I'm not saying, call your mayor, tell them you really want to do this and have 5 phone calls and everything will be solved. It's not going to work like that. It may take, I don't want to say regime change, but it may take a change in leadership in a public agency. But if you've been working for years prior to that, and this happened to me in my county, if you have already laid that foundation, when that change comes, you will be ready to help engage with that. But realize you won't necessarily get results. Curbside recycling took decades of sustained action from dedicated individuals and organizations, and now it is everywhere. We can do the same, but we have to be ready for the long haul, and we have to be consistent.
So one of the things we do in Chicago, our group runs their shelter diversion program. So we have a desk in animal control and help people keep their pets. And I think at first we were like mad. We're like, why don't they do this? And it was because they don't have people to do it and they don't have money to do it. So we started doing it, and instead of staying angry, instead we became an extension of them and allowed them to put that in their reports. So when they're asking for more money and making their budget reports and budget hearings, they can talk about the work that they're doing and ask for it to be funded. And we're just like, yeah, you guys get funding for it, and until you can get funding for it, we'll do it for you. So that kind of partnership, I think, works really well in both people's favor.
Okay, so how do you get that, I guess we have plenty of time, so I want to make sure that we touch on everything we plan to, but with what you just said, how do you get the public officials' attention on that? So they go and they're like, here's the budget, and then the budget office is like, nope, 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 nope. How does that program become part of the sustainable programming we're talking about? Because the higher-ups might be like, well, they're doing it.
Yeah. That's probably a question for you, Ellen, because I don't know that we've been successful in doing that in Chicago. But we did take a page out of Austin's book where we were just like, we had a group effort a couple of years ago where we contacted every city council member and we gave them a little survey, but then we also told them what we were looking for. And then we contacted the mayor's office, and then it like kind of escalated, and then we're like, okay, now we're mad. And so then it turned into like a public demonstration and things like that, and things changed. We didn't get a huge budget increase, but we got a different leader, and we saw some budget increase. So there's sort of like these steps to it, and I think that there probably needs to be a better like how-to book for nonprofits and people in the community, because, you know, Becky made a good point when we were talking earlier, like every city is different, and how you engage and how their budget process and who you talk to is different everywhere, and navigating that as just like someone that just lives in your city is so difficult and weird. So I think that as a community, that's something we can do to help each other, is figure out how to navigate those systems successfully.
And build relationships, build trust. You know, I deal a lot with small, you know, other small areas, rural areas and small towns. And there's one that I'm working with in my county now that started out, didn't have much luck getting a lot of work and trying to help them do better, but we did start giving them food. Saved them a few $100 in food, and next thing you know, there's a new mayor and a new ACO, and that new mayor tells the new ACO, you need to call those guys a Good Shepherd to get some food, and now we are in there completely renovating and revamping their program to fit the models, to do what we want to do. And that just starts out with sometimes a simple thing in relationship building and providing value to these services, so you build that trust. And, you know, go to the fundraisers, meet your politicians, you know, become valuable to them. Become the person that your city council person in your district calls when they have an animal question. Make yourself available. Mike Wheeler gives some great presentations on doing this very work. So I would encourage everybody, if you can look up some of those online and look at those. But we need to do more of that. And nonprofits do have the ability to engage in that way, and that our government shelters can't. And that's what we need to be doing, because we can make a huge difference.
And if you have a coalition, your coalition should write letters to everyone to be like, this is who we are, this is what we do, we should be your experts.
And by the way, pretty much your entire city wants you to do what we're asking you to do.
Yeah.
And I think knowing how to speak with them as well. We have a lot of very passionate people in our industry, and I think sometimes we go in fingers wagging. And as Lucy said the other day in her presentation, if you go in and try to tell somebody, you know, you're doing this wrong and you're wagging your finger, all you're going to do is make them, you know, just dig in that much harder, because they're going to want to be right and to hang on to their position. So knowing how to have that conversation in a respectful way, to meet them where they are, try to put yourself in their shoes and understand what challenges they may be having. Because on our perspective, we think, oh, you know, they should be putting the money from parks over here into animals or what have you. They're also dealing with, you know, crime and streets and all these other things. So it's a really big picture. We're seeing one small part of it. So just being, you know, a bit of understanding about what they're going through and having some of that compassion can be a really good foundation for building that sustainable relationship that Cole was talking about.
And understanding that they have no clue what you do. Mm-hmm. The mayor, the city council, even your city administrator, you know, most of them have no idea what you're doing. They have no idea what you're facing. The only thing that they know about animal services is that the neighbor from 3 streets down calls them every day about that dang dog that won't stop barking. Right? That is their intended dog. So remember that we have a lot of educating to do on what we do.
Okay, so how will you change your nonprofit based on what you have learned and where you are now in your journey? Or what have you changed?
I mean, we're going to insert more advocacy into what we do. So, I mean, I think it's not sustainable for us to just like go in and be like, all right, we're clean up. We're going to do everything you're not doing. And something that I've heard so many times in this conference this week is, where are all the rescues? All the rescues that used to come pull from us don't pull from us. And it's just like, rescues are tired. And also rescues fold and rescues go under and they go away and new ones come and it takes a while for them to build back up. So it's not sustainable to say, hey, nonprofits, you're going to come in and you're going to take all of our behavior dogs and all of our parvo cases and you're going to run our diversion programs and do our pet food pantry and you're going to bring, it's just like, it's crazy. You can't do that. So, you know, that's what we're doing right now, and we have to shift a little bit more time to figuring out how we allocate those resources that the public want allocated to animal control, how we can help them do that.
I think one of the things that we're trying to do and what I've done is we have to stop giving our public officials an out So a lot of our nonprofits, and mine, provides what are in some places actually public services, because at one point in time the government wasn't doing it and nobody wanted to pressure it, so they just started doing it themselves. And now the government feels no obligation to take it over. Why would I do it? You're doing it. So we need to feel okay as nonprofits of saying no. Of saying, I'm not going to take your impound contract because one, it's probably going to lose me money. And two, you should be doing it. So I'm going to have my shelter and I'll pull from whatever you're doing, but you're going to operate your responsibility as a government. I'm not going to let you get off easy and subsidize your government operation when you should be doing that. We need to help reframe the debate and show that, listen, public officials, your public expects it, we expect it, this is your responsibility as the government, you need to do it, and you're not going to bankrupt my nonprofit because you want to pay me $300 to run your impound, $300 a month, which was an offer I got not too long ago.
Well, our organization is brand new, so we get to make it up as we go along, and we have a steering committee of 17 organizations. We're very fortunate that we have both our municipal organizations, we've got private shelters, and we've got different sizes, some small cities that have municipal, as well as some small rescues and big rescues. So just the meetings that we've been having and the conversations that we've been having have really helped us to elevate the conversations in ways that before we didn't have. Groups maybe had ego problems from the past, or there's a long history of, they use red collars and we like blue ones, or whatever the case may be. So we have really gotten to know each other as people, and by coming together and, both of our kids play soccer or whatever, that's really helped us to humanize the process. So if we can get more organized on our side, especially along with our partners in the municipal and government side, then they can tell us too how to go about this. We don't have to just figure it out magically on our own as nonprofits. We have them as a partner. They can't be maybe at the table with us to say what needs to be said, but they can coach us. And so that relationship building is going to be really important for our group.
Okay, I'm going to go to our last slide and then leave a little bit of time for questions. And I can answer that last question for us too. For us in Austin, we're going to spend more time on advocacy and trying to sort this out. One thing we've also found through the Haas work is that 0.2% of government budgets go to animal services. In most cities, 30% of 311 calls are animal related. So it's not a hard sell to get. If we just got budgets to 0.4%, it wouldn't even show up as more tax dollars. And so we need to defeat the argument from policymakers that there's just no budget. There's just no budget. We can't find any money to do this. We need to elevate it and start having those conversations in a more data-driven way. Heather, I'm going to let you finish this out.
Yeah, so I think going back to the original question, we figured out why there's tension between nonprofits and government shelters. So let's go back and figure out, we all want the same thing. So let's get on the same page and talk about how we're going to get there. So that you just have to figure that out with your leadership. And then, the rest of it, I think, is really about holding the government shelters accountable. So accountability is really important. So it's not okay, we're going to go advocate you for a bigger budget, but it's you also have to do the work, and you have to use best practices, and you have to make this easier for us. And while we're supporting you, we can't take on the lion's share of what you're doing, but we will support you while we work together to find better funding and support so that it can be sustainable for government to do most of it and nonprofits to support where it makes sense.
Okay, so this is a link to this presentation. There's a bunch of hidden slides with other data, so if you want to look at the whole presentation and pull up the data, you're welcome to. But why don't we open it up for questions? I know we have a microphone back here. Anybody have any questions or thoughts?
Thank you. So I heard you kind of mention the impound contract. What is your opinion on nonprofits taking over municipal contracts? Is that a good idea, or is that not, or is that, letting the government win, I guess?
Well, I think if you have a fair contract that makes sense, then that's one thing. But my experience has been there's very few contracts that don't cost the nonprofit money. If I'm going to take on a contract, and it's going to be I'm going to charge the city what it costs me to do the work. I've watched some legacy old, local nonprofits go out of business because they took on an impound contract or a services contract. So I don't think the nonprofit doesn't have to not do the work, but if you're going to do it, you're going to tell the city, I'm going to need the money that it costs to do this work.
Right, get paid for the expertise.
So 2 years ago, our city manager decided a way for the city to save money was to cut all the funding for the city, for the municipal animal shelter, and assume that our organization would just take on all of those functions. So,
Period.
sorry, there was a long sigh there. So if that's the starting point for this discussion, what's a reasonable first step to try to broach the subject from the place that you're talking about, which is a place where if the city doesn't want to do it, that's one thing. If the city doesn't want to spend any money on it, that's a completely different thing. How do I start that conversation?
It's tough because you don't want to just shut the doors and leave every animal in need and person in need just out of luck. But there is a little bit of brinksmanship that sometimes you have to play with politicians, and you have to say, we're going to do certain things, but we won't do others. But you need to talk about it. You need to be talking to, posting about it. Hey, by the way, running this city service cost us $100,000 last year, and that's why we can't provide you free pet food anymore. So please call the mayor and ask him to do his part.
Yeah, community organizing is super powerful for that kind of stuff when you have someone that is not listening to you or is that unreasonable, then I think you take reasonable steps and then you just organize your community and just go all, and Best Friends is really good at supporting that too. They're really good at providing data, and their advocacy team is a good place to start with that as well.
And be upfront and be public about it. Be upfront about what it's costing you, what it's costing your organization, what you're not able to do because of it. What are they going to do? Not help you any more than they're already not helping you? Let the public know, and I'm not saying be nasty or stuff, but show people this is what this is doing, and we're providing this service, and it's killing us. And
I'm sorry. I was going to say, I think too, sometimes finding out the way that they do think, because maybe they don't really care that much about dogs and cats, but they do care about parks. So if there's an impact to the parks, or if you're finding that you can no longer help senior citizens, and they care a lot about senior citizens, try to frame it in things that they do care about, because I think we a lot of times stay very focused on the animal side and forget about the people side. So we need to sometimes make that argument from the people side to let them know about the impact of public health, public safety, all of that. So sometimes just trying to change that argument a little bit to something that does resonate with them will help a lot.
But keep talking. Keep bringing it up to them, to everybody. Don't let it just fade into become the status quo.
Yeah.
Keep talking about it.
And I would add to that the sadly, something I've learned is that when you don't have an intrinsic interest in animals in your policymakers, universally, the number one driver of action is getting rid of noise. And that's it. And so if you can't find somebody to champion the issue because they have other things that are more important than creating community action around making noise. And I think there's a fallacy that you need to be coordinated. It doesn't matter, just noise. Just noise and the word animal, they're not listening anyway. It's just make it go away. What is the path of least resistance? And then they want a solution. But unless there's pain, there's no solution. Really.
So make them feel
sorry.
pain.
Anyone else? Oh.
Does it work? Okay. So I recently had to present to be a charity of choice for a fundraising event. And I had never done it in front of other organizations before. And there was 10 other organizations. 8 of them involved children. 1 of us involved animals, and the other one was veterans. Well, it was apparent to me very quickly that everybody loved animals but the children were definitely going to win when it came to where that money was going to go. So one of the things that we took back from that, and I don't know, I have a suggestion for that idea of where do you start. So now our shelter has gone into humane education. I'm pushing into Boys and Girls Clubs. I'm pushing into the elementary schools. I'm pushing into, and then in turn going to my governmental people and saying, I'm benefiting your children. I'm benefiting your future. I'm doing those things only as a leverage card. I hate to say that's what it is, but that's exactly what it is I'm trying to steal more and more access to the community, because the animal thing is great until it involves battered women. I'm going to be dumped for that. I'm going to be dumped behind the children. I mean, you're
make
going to
those
fall lower on the
ties.
totem pole.
Make those ties, because
Yeah.
there's a lot of connections, and I think using the data to make those connections is really helpful.
And there's,
So
there's more and more data out there. Habri has amazing data on their website. Okay, we're out of time, but we're happy to stay for questions, and all of our email addresses, I think, are on the first slide.